Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. We'll give folks just a minute or two to file in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks for being here. Okay, let's go ahead and dive right in. We've got a good group of folks already, and I'm sure some more will come online in the next few minutes. Once again, good morning to everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Greg Plotkin. I'm the Senior Manager for Smart Solar Outreach and Engagement at American Farmland Trust. Today, you're here for a webinar titled Perspectives on Agrivoltaics in Colorado, Findings from the First Ever Statewide Survey of the Agricultural Community. With funding from the inaugural round of the Colorado Department of Agriculture's Agrivoltaics Research and Demonstration Grants Program, AFT recently completed the first ever statewide survey to document how Colorado farmers, ranchers, and landowners view agrivoltaic solar energy development in the state. In the webinar today, we'll share findings from the survey, highlight key trends, and discuss recommendations to advance agrivoltaics in Colorado. Before I introduce our guests, just a quick note on how best to participate in today's event. We've built in time at the end of the presentations to answer your questions. As you're listening in, please feel free to drop your questions into the chat feature. I'll be reviewing them and getting them ready to post to the panelists. We'll answer as many as we can in the time that we have. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Kristen Boyson, Managing Director of the Ag Drought and Climate Resilience Office at the Colorado Department of Agriculture, to tell you a little bit about CDA's agrivoltaics focus. Then you'll hear from Austin Kinzer, AFT's Agrivoltaics Senior Technical Specialist, and finally, Thomas Hickey from AgriSolar Consulting. Kristen, really appreciate you being here today. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Greg. Thanks for having me today, and very excited to hear the presentation about your grant results. We were really happy to have AFT as a grantee in, as Greg said, our inaugural year of funding for the Agrivoltaics Research and Demonstration Grant. So I'll share my slide here quickly. Can you all see my slides? Excellent.
We can.
Great, so I'll go through this relatively quickly, but do want to give an overview of our Agrivoltaics Research and Demonstration Grant here at the Colorado Department of Ag. This funding and program was developed by the state legislature last spring, 2023, excuse me, and it committed $500,000 of general fund for projects that conduct new or ongoing demonstration or research projects as a means to study the potential benefits and trade-offs of agrivoltaics in the state. Around the state, people are talking about the vast need for solar development and how quickly solar is going in, and there's a clear understanding that there's some agricultural and energy conflict. So agrivoltaics is really being looked at as a potential solution in some locations where we can co-locate these two things we as a state desire, both agriculture and food production, as well as renewable energy development. So a CDA, it was a pretty broad bill, and so we at CDA had a fair amount of authority to figure out how to design this program. I will say there's two main constraints. One, of course, is the funding amount, $500,000, which is not nothing, but is also not enough to fund every solar development in the state. And also the money has to be spent within the state fiscal year. So we're very kind of constrained by the state budget. However, we've done two successful grant rounds of funding. Today we'll hear about one of the grantees, Austin and Tom and Greg's work, and I'll go through a couple of the other ones we funded. Our grant is open to a wide range of eligible entities, nonprofits, research institutions, solar developers, farmers and ranchers, and utilities. And then we have a lot of different activities that are eligible for the grant too. Construction, demonstration projects, outreach and education projects, and research. And we funded all four of those project areas. So last year, in our first year, 2023 to 2024, we funded 7 projects all over the state. If you guys have a big screen, you can see this map. If you don't, it's probably too small. But as you can see, we have a bunch of different projects, from a project out on the Eastern Plains that installed a solar windbreak on a farm and measured the impact of soil on either side of the windbreak, as well as the energy generated. We had a solar developer convert one of their traditional arrays into an agrivoltaics array using sheep, and they looked at the cost savings of their O&M costs. We had a couple different research partners look at economic trade-offs. We had a couple demonstration projects, and then our 2 statewide projects were American Farmland Trust's Great Outreach Survey project, and then a land trust, Colorado Cattlemen's, did a review on kind of what it would take to put agrivoltaics on an existing conservation easement, and what kind of template language should be included in future conservation easements to allow for it. Because right now, if you have a land under easement, you often can't do energy development. One of the barriers. So here's some outputs from our first year of grants. We were very excited about all the great work all of our grantees did, given the first 2 things I talked about: small amounts of funding. I think I asked every grantee to cut their budget, and a short timeline. Because it was our first year of funding, not only did they not only have a year to do the project, they all had about 6.5 months to do their project. So good job, everyone, for crushing it. That first yellow box in the upper left, 225 complete survey responses. We'll hear all about that in a few minutes. AFT did a lot of roundtables and events. I will say several of our demonstration projects also hosted field days at their projects up in RDEC at the Colorado State campus, and at our project out on the western slope. Did some research, as I said, about the kind of easements and energy development potential conflict. CSU Lab developed an economic framework to look at kind of the cost trade-offs between yield reduction and solar energy development, which is a fun little calculator to play around with, and hopefully helpful for producers. For demonstration, like I said, we had a project up at the Agricultural Research and Demonstration Education Campus, RDEC, up in Fort Collins. And we had a vineyard install some soil moisture probes and really look at the difference between under the panels and not, and how their water use changed. And we were able to install some panels, even with this short timeline. Like I said, we did that solar windbreak out in the east, and then also some bifacial panels were installed. So we got all of our quadrants hit, and we're very proud of it. About 2 weeks ago, we announced our 2024 awardees. It was another competitive grant. We had about $3.5 million worth of requests, and we only had $500,000 to give away. So, about the same admittance rate as like Harvard, I would say. Here's our list of our current funded projects. They just got their contracts and have hit the ground running. As you can see, we again have some research projects. We have some more outreach work happening with Thomas and AgriSolar Consulting. There's a few more kind of construction projects working with utilities to actually install agrivoltaic sites, like up at the Darling Ranch. Cloudbreak Energy is working very closely with a producer there. And then some research working with feedlots, and also with agrivoltaics over an orchard. So we have a wide sweeping array of more work being done right now. I think, Greg, you said we'll pause for questions at the end. Great.
That's right.
I'm happy to talk about any of these 6 projects or the previous 7 at the end, or kind of any of the processes. I just wanted to flag really quickly the bill that created this program also had 2 other studies attached to it. One is about photovoltaics. What would it look like if we put solar over irrigation canals and other water distribution sources? So that study's due to be out this winter, so keep your eyes out. It's being done by the Colorado Water Center up at CSU. And then also we're doing a study on kind of carbon markets, related, although tangential to the topic du jour. So that's all I have. Hopefully a good overview, and we're really excited about this program, and mostly ecstatic that our grantees have been so ready to hit the ground running. So I'll pass it back over to Greg. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Kristen. Appreciate it. Just a reminder to folks, we'd love to answer your questions. If you've got any for Kristen or Austin or Thomas, drop them into the chat and we'll get to them right after the presentations are over. And with that, turn it over to Austin.
Great. Thank you very much, Greg, for hosting. And thank you, Kristen, for that overview of the grants themselves. And curious to see more on the photovoltaics. Another great example of dual use, not covering prime farmland. So love to see that. So I'm going to cover more of the qualitative side of the work, some findings from our roundtables, as well as our recommendations to the state for strategies to advance agrivoltaics. So background on American Farmland Trust, you're probably mostly familiar with us, but we're committed to saving the land that sustains us. That means protecting farmland, promoting sound farming practices, and keeping farmers on the land. So if you haven't seen this before, I highly encourage you to check out farmland.org/solar. We have our smart solar principles, and at its core, as Chris alluded to, there's this conflict that's happening between energy and agriculture for land use. And so as a farmland conservation nonprofit, the way we've approached this is these 4 principles, smart solar principles. So number 1, prioritizing siting on buildings and lands not well suited for farming. Particularly really interested in seeing more solar on brownfields and marginal lands, less so on prime farmland to the extent we can avoid it. Number 2, safeguard the ability for land to be used for agriculture. So either throughout the life of the project or after the project, ensuring that this is still viable agricultural land. Number 3, grow agrivoltaics for agricultural production and solar energy. That's why we're here, to understand how can we advance agrivoltaics in the state of Colorado. And number 4, promote equity and farm viability, making sure that the benefits of this dual use concept are accessible to all producers. So a little background on the grant. We partnered with Colorado Open Lands, AgriSolar Consulting, Colorado State University Extension. And really the goal here is to get feedback from Colorado producers. I've come from an energy engineering background. I'm not a farmer by training. And I go to these events for agrivoltaics, and, especially less so in the last year, but, the few years prior to that, the number of farmers who'd be in these conversations, very, very few. And so that was really what we're trying to address with this, is make sure that the voices of agricultural producers are being elevated in these conversations around agrivoltaics and policy, and so that at the end of the day, we have something that's going to work for farmers. Because if it doesn't work for farmers, it's simply not going to happen. So outcomes from the grant, Kristen covered some of this, but over 200 survey responses. We had about 180 participants across our roundtable events. And then we have our set of recommendations for CDA, which we'll go through here. Some common themes from our roundtables. Number 1 is just a need for more information. There's a lot of open questions still out there to be answered about agrivoltaics, in terms of how does it impact soils, how does it impact specific crops, and even varieties of crops. Should you use a different variety of wheat if you're going to be planting underneath solar panels? We don't have a great answer for that. It's going to depend where you are regionally. How does this affect livestock? How does this affect the daily weight gain of beef cattle? We don't know. We don't have an answer to that. And then how's this going to affect farming practices? In particular, producers, time and time again, raised concerns around how this will affect their efficiency. Instead of, having an open field, they've got to navigate around the array. How much time, additional labor cost is that going to cause? How does that affect their ability to actually harvest crops? Is it efficient enough to be worthwhile for them? So there's still some unanswered questions there, as far as what are those yield trade-offs, and how do you adapt your farming operation to be able to manage that? We also need more information out there on what are the funding opportunities for producers. The structure of the solar industry is not intuitive, and certainly not if you haven't been living in this world for years. So understanding, okay, how does third-party financing work? How does, if I want to own the system, what are the different funding options that are available, such as USDA's Rural Energy for America program, CDA's agrivoltaics grants, the solar investment tax credit? How do you navigate all of that as a producer and understand what the best path forward is for you? So understanding that is another major gap. And then seeing case studies of successful examples was something else we heard quite a bit of. Folks want to see, like, okay, show me where has this worked, who's done this. And right now there really aren't that many examples out there. So we need to do a better job of elevating those examples that are there and supporting the producers who are trying this out so that we can learn more and make sure that other producers are aware of what is possible. And I would personally really like to see more of these small pilot projects. So really appreciate what CDA is doing, so that producers can really go county over to go see it for themselves, interact with the system, rather than having to go halfway across the state for it. Another common theme was questions on siting. So how do solar siting processes work? There's a lot of concern that's very, very opaque. There's the information gap between citizens, producers, and the developers who are doing this work. There's not always great communication there. There's questions about local zoning laws and how does that affect the ability to do agrivoltaics? Is it even feasible? How does that affect the property tax assessment? Is it still agricultural land? A lot of questions on water rights. This is a major concern. We're heard especially in the western part of the state. One of the projects happening now is an 80 megawatt sheep grazing project in Delta, Colorado, and that part of the reason for that project doing sheep grazing was to retain the water rights. This is important locally to the community to have those water rights, not have those go downstream to the next rights holder. And then a lot of questions on decommissioning. This is a common concern, and a valid concern. There's people are wondering, okay, if this solar company that owns this project goes broke, then what? What's going to happen to my land? I just have 50 acres of steel and aluminum and glass and silicon out there. It's not really that attractive. So making sure that do have clear decommissioning guidelines, which I don't believe we have at the state level today, and making sure that landowners are protected through that, because that's a major concern that they have. We did hear interest from producers for diversifying the revenue and protecting crops from extreme heat, particularly for fruit producers out on the western slope. This is a common one, where they are actually directly seeing impacts from extreme heat affecting the quality of their crops. And so they see this as a potential benefit to protect their crops. And then we also heard frustration, the time and cost to access federal funding from the folks who are pursuing on-farm solar or agrivoltaics, where there's a lot of red tape to get through, and that's challenging, costs a lot of money, costs a lot of time. So figuring out how can we reduce those barriers for producers, help them understand earlier on in the process, is this feasible, and then decide if they want to move forward. And I do want to say, the feedback we heard was mixed. It's not uniformly positive or negative. If I won't steal Tom's thunder on the survey data, but one of the data points that I thought was interesting was a question on, in general, do you support siting solar on farmland? And overall is 40% yes, 30% no, and then another 30% in the middle. And that 30% in the middle are the folks who see this as a way to keep farmland in production and mitigate those potential negative impacts to agricultural communities from having solar sited there. So I think that middle group is who this is really interesting to explore, understand, how does this actually affect their support for solar? So I'll leave Tom to dive into the survey data. But so this is from one of our roundtables. This is out in Olathe, Colorado. And there's some quotes that really stuck with me. One, this is a farmer's perspective. As an older farmer, You farm until you grow houses and retire. That's common sentiment, is that, you farm as long as you can and then sell out to developer. And for us as a farmland conservation nonprofit, this is really heartbreaking to hear. We want to make sure that farmers feel that there is a viable path forward in farming and that they can keep that land in production, pass it up down to the next generation. And in terms of threats to farmland, low density residential development is the single largest threat. And then from a producer who is actually pursuing a project, basically, if we can do it, we'll continue our farming operation. Otherwise, we'll sell out. And again, this is in a county where the primary threat to development or primary threat to farmland is residential development. So this really is a way that we can keep farmland in production as opposed to letting it get sold out to more subdivisions. So getting into our recommendations, number one, we need more educational materials out there, more outreach through trusted organizations. So specifically CSU Extension, they have a huge role to play here, as they're by far the most trusted in our survey data. And so we need field demonstrations, peer-to-peer learning. Farmers can learn from other farmers, that's who they trust. Workshops and more information materials out there, help folks understand what opportunities there are, what they need to be aware of. Number two, establish technical assistance program to support producers through feasibility studies, site assessments, and project planning services, and helping folks get through those early stages and cover some of those early costs to decide if it's possible and understand what those economics would look like. Number three, introduce financial incentives. This is one of the biggest barriers to doing something different with solar, is that there's really no incentive to do that. So there's, I'd say, financial incentives, and also there may be a regulatory pathway there where if utility scale solar RFPs include some criteria for land stewardship, that could incentivize solar developers to actually take this more seriously as a way to be more competitive for the RFP. So it could take the form of tax incentives, grants, low interest loans, or some of these other regulatory pathways. Number four, support interagency and cross-sectoral partnerships. The nature of this work is that it's very inherently interdisciplinary. You need to have many stakeholders at the table to do it well. So we would like to see more of that. So specifically calling out state agencies here, research institutions, farmers and ranchers, solar developers, and then electric utilities and rural electric co-ops. One thing we found as well is that rural electric co-ops are potentially very well positioned to benefit from agrivoltaics, specifically with federal funding. They qualify as a nonprofit, so they can get the full federal tax credit for solar as direct pay, and then they are also eligible for a ton of funding from USDA. So rural electric co-ops could potentially benefit greatly from this. So we would like to see them at the table figuring out how we can do this. Number five, develop supportive zoning and land use policies to enable agrivoltaics. This really happens at the local level, county level. So we need to make sure that these conversations are happening at the local level and that folks are aware and are thinking through the nuance of what this type of land use is and what that means for property taxes and zoning. Number six, facilitate ongoing stakeholder engagement with producers and landowners. So thinking surveys, focus groups, advisory committees, making sure that these people are still continually engaged, and as this field develops, as it rapidly has over the last few years, that we're continuing to address the needs of producers and adapt programs that fit their needs. Number seven, creating accessible online resources. So guides for landowners, best practices, funding opportunities, what the latest research is. And then finally, ensure that future programs, research, and partnerships actively promote equity so that these benefits can be shared by all producers. So a few acknowledgements. This project does not happen in a vacuum. Really want to thank all the farmers and ranchers in Colorado who participated in our survey and our roundtables. Would not be possible without you all. Thank you to the Colorado Department of Agriculture for funding this work and for being a great partner along the way. Thank you to AgriSolar Consulting, Tom, Alexis, Natalia, for your work in getting the survey done and the data analysis. Really appreciate you all. Thank you to CSU Extension, specifically Martha Solons. You've been a huge help. Also thank Mark Uchansky at CSU, who's great help in getting the word out on our roundtables and survey. Thank you to Colorado Open Lands, Sarah Palmer, Sally Weir, Ben Lemp, very helpful in helping organize roundtables and get us through here. Thank you to the AFT Smart Solar team. Greg Plotkin's been a huge help. Mira Heckert's no longer part of the team, but she was a huge help along the way. Callie McPeters, great project manager. Could not have done this without her keeping us on task. Ethan Winter, Anthony Latwal, Jimmy Dacus. Thank you all. I want to thank the Colorado State Land Board for helping get the survey out. Huge help, as well as Rocky Mountains Farmers Union, Colorado Cattlemen's Agricultural Land Trust, Colorado Farm and Food Alliance. Thank you again to the Colorado Fruit and Vegetable Growers Association, Valley Organic Growers Association, Colorado Farm Show, Colorado Ag Leadership Program, Guidestone Colorado, and then a few individual thank yous to Anna Claire Mollison, Angela Burke, Jordan Macknick, Byron Kominick, and again, many more. So thank you all for your help in making this project reality. And with that, I will hand it off to Tom.
Wonderful. Thanks, Austin, and everyone. How is that going? Can you see the title slide right now? Okay, awesome.
Okay.
I'll keep the sounds good. Thanks. I'll keep the gratitude going here for a second and just say thank you to Austin and the AFT team, both for the opportunity to collaborate on this project, but also for having me here today to share some of these results from the survey portion of our overall effort. Also, thanks to CDA, of course, for carrying this through and making these opportunities available to us. I've been researching and implementing agrivoltaic projects in Colorado and beyond for just over 6 years now, and it's really been amazing to see the concept of agrivoltaics grow so rapidly and have such tremendous backing and really the level of support that we see today. And it's with that growth and support that it was also important for us to take a second and really get a baseline understanding, document it, what's going on in the state, how do agricultural producers view this concept of agrivoltaics, really help us get a better understanding. So from a high level, the goal of the survey portion was to explore Colorado producers' awareness, concerns, and interests, and their interest levels around agrivoltaics. As Kristen mentioned, we had 225 complete responses. We had about 312 total. Not every question was required to be answered, so we had a couple of partial data sets there as well. The survey targeted about 6,000 producers. That's what we were able to complete with our outreach efforts. So thanks to Greg and the AFT team for really spearheading that effort. And we did have representation from 50 of the 64 counties in Colorado. So pretty good diversity there, geographically speaking. And diving right into some of the demographics. In this chart here, we see a breakdown of all respondents by county along with their farming affiliation. We can see that up at the top, Adams, Weld, and San Miguel County have the highest representation from all 50 of those counties. And additionally, we can see the agriculture affiliation on this chart. So highest representation from the farm ranch owner operators, 41%. 28% of respondents were landowners, and then only 6% were tenant farmers, 15% other affiliations. So just something to keep in mind as we're analyzing and presenting this data, the backgrounds, both geographically and then also affiliation with the farm itself. Similar here, primary agricultural operation. We have a higher percentage of cattle calf operations, and then it goes next on the list is hay at 15%, alfalfa and wheat at 9%, corn 7%, and then 6% vegetable production. And then on the graph, you can see other agricultural operation types that we asked about as well. We asked about size of operation too, and shout out to Austin for this graph. You can see in the green the results from our survey, and then in comparison to the orange bars there, that's the USDA Ag Census results for the state of Colorado. So you can see we're a little bit skewed off to the right. We had 48% of respondents up at 1,000 acres plus in their farm scale, which is much larger than the norm for Colorado when considering all operations. So this is something else that we can consider when looking at this data and analyzing it, that nothing significant really from it, although it is something that we should consider and when thinking about perspectives and perceptions of current and future land use in our state. And as we take that kind of baseline reading of what's going on in our state around agrivoltaics, we wanted to get baseline of awareness. And so we asked just what's the familiarity. And we see 3 fairly equal but distinct groups where 31% of respondents had never heard of agrivoltaics or do not understand it and the concept. And on the flip side, 32% have a firm or deep understanding of agrivoltaics. So those two are about equal. And then right in the middle there, 37% have a basic understanding of the concept. And so this goes to show that there has been a lot of progress made, again, going back to 5-6 years ago when I was at some of the conferences around the state where folks had never heard of it before. Now, 2/3 of people have at least heard of it, at least the folks who answered our survey. But there is still that 1/3, approximately 1/3 of a gap there that we have a little bit of room to make up in getting the word out and informing people about what agrivoltaics is, what it can do, and also that will help us understand what barriers are there as well. Then moving on to the next section of the survey, we asked about concerns and also support for solar on agricultural lands. So this chart here, we're looking at impacts of concern for solar development on ag lands in our state. One of the top concerns we see among respondents is the potential negative impact of solar projects on land conservation. 61% of respondents are very concerned about that. And then moving down the chart there, most respondents are very concerned about impacts on farm productivity, 57%, tenant farmers and land leases, 57%, the visual landscape, 57%, farm and ranch viability, 57% again, and then soil quality, land prices and land access, and then potential impacts on agricultural water rights. So we found that there's really the least amount of concern relative to other choices associated with impacts on ag supply chains and then impacts on local communities. And that was a little bit of an interesting finding, thinking about communities, because generally when you hear about pushback on solar, it's usually at the community scale. And then thinking about this relative to the other choices, maybe it's a little bit more on the individual or case-by-case basis and not so much about rural communities as a whole. So something to consider and maybe dive into a little bit more. And then next here, we have a chart that's showing preferences for siting solar projects based on the type of farmland. And the data here reveals strong preference for siting projects on the least productive land or underutilized farmland rather than highly productive land. And that makes a lot of sense. And it's very much so in alignment with AFT's smart solar principles, as Austin shared about a few minutes ago. So respondents showed the highest support for using this marginal land, the least productive land, where 33% are always in favor, and also land that's not suitable for pasture cultivation, 39% are always in favor of developing solar on that type of land. There's also significant opposition, like I mentioned, for placing solar projects on the most productive farmland, where 51% are never in favor of that. And also pretty strong opposition to putting solar on forested land. So nobody really wants to cut down trees to put solar down, which also makes sense. And then here we're asking about solar development and energy generation conditions for a solar site. So would different conditions on the site impact support? Would it decrease support, no change, or increase? And here we see support actually increases when projects are designed to protect the long-term agricultural viability of the land. And then increased support remains at or above 50% of respondents when the developer or the project owner will maintain access to that land to the tenant farmer, so continue to farm it, when the project is specifically designated for continued agricultural activity, or when the project generates additional revenue for the landowner. And then right at 50% there is this option if native vegetation is planted alongside or underneath the solar to create pollinator habitat. And that's an interesting one, one that is now being called ecovoltaics. So think about ecology and ecosystems as compared to strictly agriculture. And then the next section of the survey here that I'll highlight is thinking about solar on individual producers' agricultural land. And we'll start off here with this potential motivation to lease land to a solar developer. So up at the top of this bar chart here, you can see 61% of respondents indicated that this opportunity to provide supplementary income to their operation is the top potential motivator to lease land. That's followed by other motivators, a little bit less so, like maximizing the land use, supporting the ability to continue farming, and also using the infrastructure for protecting animals or livestock or crops. That's really at the heart of what agrivoltaics is and some of those co-benefits that we see. And then here we also asked about willingness to engage with different types of agrivoltaic activities. And we can see from the chart that there's a lot of no throughout, but there are some areas where folks are optimistic and open to trying different agrivoltaic activities. Mainly the top choice was the participants expressed interest in the willingness to participate in agrivoltaics with livestock, but not necessarily sheep. They said cattle or poultry or other types of livestock. And then this was followed by hosting apiaries and then growing food crops like vegetables and fruits. Then up at the top, we can see we started asking about navigating combines, larger farm equipment within the arrays. That's where we saw the willingness to engage drop off significantly, where 71% of respondents would not want to participate in that type of agrivoltaic. So it's certainly a barrier that we have noted and found quantitatively here, and we knew this a little bit going into it, but this gives us the hard data to say, okay, if we really are thinking about the scalability of agrivoltaics, how can we start to address some of these concerns and the willingness to engage with different types of agrivoltaics? And then the last section, we asked participants in the survey about information. How do they like to consume information? How do they like to learn? What do they want to learn about? And also, who do they trust? So some of the top trusted sources for information, as Austin alluded to, up at the top there is CSU Extension, also near the top, farm associations and organizations, along with state agencies. Attorneys are up there, which was interesting to us, but that is most likely for land lease information. We'll see here in a second. Folks are interested in learning more about that. And then CSU Ag Experiment Stations are up there too, which go hand in hand with CSU Extension. Should be noted as well, down near the bottom, solar developers and electric utility companies are not very well trusted for information on this topic at this time. And some folks don't trust anyone for information. We asked about the efficiency and efficacy of different distribution techniques. So how do folks like to learn, as Austin mentioned in recommendations? Top choices here: peer-to-peer learning from other farmers and field demonstrations. Those I also believe go hand in hand. They can be really effective and really prove viability of the concept. And just anecdotally, there have been countless occasions where I've been talking with folks who have visited Jack's or another site around, and then they say it was in those moments that they visited that it all really clicked for them. It all made sense. And you can see photos, you can see videos, but there's something different about going to the sites and seeing things with your eyes. And it all comes back to seeing is believing, which is true in general, but certainly true in the agricultural community. To be able to see these things happening. Another site, which is garnering a lot of interest right now, is out in Massachusetts. A farm developed by Hyperion Systems is growing broccoli with a raised an elevated system that is single axis tracking as well, and they're seeing some really great results. So all these different demonstration projects, allowing people to go visit, they're the real deal, and they really do make a difference. And then the last chart that I'll share for now is we asked about different information that people are interested in when making decisions or potentially making decisions in the future about leasing land for solar. And here we see that farmers expressed a desire for more information around the financial costs and benefits. So coming back to the economics, monetary considerations, land lease agreements, and also legal advice related to solar installation. So as I mentioned, attorneys were up there on most trusted, and it's probably related to this type of information where they would like some info on land leases. And then quickly switching over to looking ahead for agri-solar consulting, what we'll be up to in the next couple of months, really over the next year here. So we're going to continue our education and outreach efforts, building from the survey, taking some of those results, what we learned, and then building upon them. So here are some of the objectives for our next round of CDA funding. Top of that list is Farmland Solar Technical Assistance Education and Resource Tool, which we're calling the FASTER tool. And I'll have one more slide about this. It's going to be an open access geospatial or map tool. They'll be online, aimed at, again, open access information, both at the county level, different natural resources, informational resources, helping connect farmers with their peers. That is the goal for that. Next on the list is Farmland Solar Guides. So getting out bite-sized information in collaboration with CSU Extension. These will be similar to fact sheets or may take the form of fact sheets in the end. And then also continued engagement with different stakeholders in the agricultural community, socializing the FASTER tool and the solar guides. These will take place mainly at conferences across the state in the off-season this fall and winter. And then a toolkit to bring everything together, everything that we're producing through this effort. So it will host the tool, it will host the guides, and then it will also provide other resources, external links to calc, links to CDA, and of course AFT, to connect people with the folks who have the information and who know more about specific topics. And then last but not least on this list is CSU Extension focus groups, which will be at the Ag Experiment Station. So we'll do this to equip different Extension agents and personnel with information about the topics, provide them with the guides, train them on the FASTER tool, so how they can help producers figure out if their land is technically primed up for solar and what options they have. And then just a little bit more information for now about our FASTER tool, the map layers. As I mentioned, there will be several different layers that we'll have on this tool, and we're open to feedback now and throughout the process. We view this as a very iterative process. As I mentioned, we'll be socializing this tool throughout the winter. So this is really the first time we're sharing it with the agricultural community here in our state. So if folks have ideas of what they think may be useful that's not on here, or maybe there's some things that we don't need to include, we're happy to hear that. We're open to any feedback and really excited to get working on this project. So with that, I thank you all for your time, and I think we can switch it over to Q&A now.
Great. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate that. Austin, any wrap-up comments or insights from you now that we've gone through the findings from the roundtables and the survey?
Putting me on the spot there. Well, I would just say that there are still a number of barriers to actually doing this at scale, particularly for crop production. So yeah, that's why we're here. That's why we're having these conversations, and that's why it's so important to bring the farmers in so that we aren't pushing forward with things that aren't viable. So yeah, that's all I got.
I like it. All right, so we're gonna open it up to the Q&A. We've got a couple great questions here. I'm gonna invite people to come off chat and just give context to these more so than what they put into the webinar chat here. First one's gonna be from Ray Solomon, and I think Kristen, this is mostly for you. So when it comes to the CDA grant, will there be any published outcome of the demonstration and construction projects that were funded?
Do you want me?
Ray, I don't.
Do you want me to?
Yeah, Ray. If you've got any specifics you want to ask Kristen about, what kind of information you're looking for, feel free to expand on that.
I mean, I'm curious about, you mentioned that windbreak on the Eastern Plains. I'm curious, will there be any kind of published results? Like, are there specific things that you're looking at, and if there's a demonstration project, will there be any lessons learned that were published, that will be published?
Yeah, great question, Ray. Thanks for that. And yeah, we really hope that all of these projects can have public facing lessons learned and outcomes. So people just submitted their final reports at the beginning of this month, end of last month. So we're compiling those, and we'll certainly have their reports and kind of a summary of the projects on our website. And then I think we've been discussing internally doing kind of a more kind of public, here's all of our grantees, have them do a little quick summary so that folks like you and other people who are either interested in our grant program or interested in agrivoltaics more broadly can kind of learn what's been going on. So short answer, yes.
And when do you think that might happen?
Probably in the winter time. But I'll drop our website in the chat, and I think there's a place to sign up for updates. So if you want to sign up there, we'll keep you informed.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. I think, Max, you've got a couple, but I think we'll just start with your first one here. Curious for Austin and other in the group whether farmers had thoughts on which crops were the lowest hanging fruit for agrivoltaics, and which were likely logistically too burdensome to work with.
Yeah, I'd certainly welcome Tom's input on this. I think the immediate opportunities are going to be hay for larger scale. I think there's just a wide range of equipment that you can use with it. Fairly easy to navigate a tractor with a baler on the back through the rows compared to some other equipment. Specialty crops, so particularly vineyards out on the western slope, I think make a lot of sense, where again you're concerned about heat impacts on the crop quality, and it's a high value crop. I'd say crops that aren't viable probably be corn. Just doesn't make sense. We did a conceptual design for potatoes, but I think it'd be pretty hard to do in practice. It's very large machinery, and you need large truck access in the field. Could be doable, but be challenging to do it at very large scale, like what we see in the San Luis Valley. Tom, any other thoughts from you on the lowest hanging fruit versus those that are probably too difficult?
Yeah, I think that was a pretty good overview. It really depends on several factors, right? Lowest hanging fruit is referring to kind of like industry standard solar array designs and what you can do with that. I think that you hit it pretty well there, but if you start to elevate the panels, space them out more, it really opens up several other options and it allows more sunlight to get into those areas. So, you know, thinking about Jack Solar Garden, they're growing dozens of different crop varieties there with varying success rates. So, yeah, there's several different crops that can do well. We're still learning the specifics about each climate and microclimate of what herbs prefer what specialty crops prefer which area. So for now, I think we should try it all and see what works for each area.
Yeah, and I think some of the research will bear out what is actually the lowest hanging fruit, right? Because in Colorado, summers are hot, they're getting hotter, very high sun. So people that are trying to grow things like leafy greens, pretty much impossible in a full sun environment in Colorado. But under solar panels, it could be something that becomes a kind of lowest hanging fruit crop based on those microclimates that Tom was talking about. Let's go next to Matthias. Curious to know if farmers who own or rent their machinery would be willing to open to switching to smaller machinery that would fit easier within an array.
Yeah, that's a great question. We didn't get into the nuance of owning versus renting machinery. The biggest concern we heard regarding just like machinery size is just efficiency of the operation. Because if you're switching to smaller machine, it's going to take you more passes the field in order to harvest the same amount. And so, I think farmers might be willing to entertain it, but they need to know that the payoff will be worthwhile for that trade-off of increased time. So I think this is a place where we probably need more research to understand what are those trade-offs in terms of extra time it takes to harvest a field with smaller equipment, navigating the solar structure. That's still not a well understood question. So yeah, to answer, I think they could be willing, but need to prove that the economics make sense for it.
And I think the survey responses that we found were farmers and ranchers were not super interested in using any kind of tractors within an agrivoltaic array, big or large, or big or small. Okay, let's move next to this question from Bill, who I'll allow to talk as well. I think this is really a question for all of you. Who is studying new legislation revenues that can apply to agrivoltaics? I'm not familiar with these bills, but SB 207 for community solar plus storage, SB 218 becoming a prosumer on a virtual power plant.
Yeah, I can take this one. And actually, Bill had also asked earlier about the Solar for All grant. And so I'll start with that. My understanding is that there was a chunk of that, I want to say like a quarter, give or take, of that funding roughly will go to community solar, low-income community solar. So that could include agrivoltaics. I know there's some conversations around how do you actually do that that have been happening between CDA and CEO, I think. But it's still early. Like, we don't have the rules. It'll probably be a year before any of that funding actually gets out the door. So answer is yes, possibly, likely a little bit. TBD as far as how that'll actually play out and how much would go to conventional community solar. Kristen, anything to add on that?
Yeah, that's about it, Austin. We at CDA are in close communication with the energy office around all three of those things. Solar for All, which they're spending this current year, kind of September to June, planning for how to distribute all that money, and then starting next summer will be the real try to get a bunch of money out the door time, including, we hope, for agrivoltaics projects. And in that community solar bucket likely, but maybe anywhere. And then, the current legislation around land use and community solar is being headed off by CEO and the Department of Local Affairs. but CDA's in there talking it up, talking about agrivoltaics, figuring out how we can all be integrated. So all things are in the early stages, but I think are very promising opportunities.
Yeah, and then just on the note on virtual power plants and prosumer model, there's I would say it's going to be in the same categories, community solar. So anything that community solar be eligible for, community solar project doing agrivoltaics would be eligible for. I don't know that there will be any specific carve outs for agrivoltaics within those particular programs. My understanding is that the virtual power plant rules still need to come from Public Utilities Commission. So unless something happens there that would be different for agrivoltaics versus other types of solar projects, I doubt. We haven't really seen anything like that from the PUC.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't expect to be any different from other types of solar at similar scales.
Great, thank you. Couple other insights from Max here while we have a couple more minutes. So 2/3 of Colorado farmers, based on the survey results, have a basic or higher understanding of agrivoltaics, and he was just noting that seems kind of high. Like, is that similar to other states? Do we think that most farmers are at least aware of what this is, or if this is kind of like unique to Colorado because of JAX and some of the more advanced demonstrations that are going on in the state?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. I would also say that it seems pretty high even for Colorado, and I think it's probably indicative of the sample size that we received and the sampling group that decided to respond to the survey. It's folks that have heard of agrivoltaics or dual use probably leaned more into the survey to share their answers as compared to folks who hadn't heard of it. So I would say that might be part of it, but with that, it's growing. The awareness is growing rapidly across the state, and again, it takes folks like AFT, like CDA talking about it, and Calc, Jack Solar Garden showing up at these events and spreading the word at the conferences all across the state, sharing findings. So I think that Colorado is, compared to other states, is really a hotbed for agrivoltaics and growing in awareness exponentially. So a little bit of both there.
And then final, just insight from Max here. The data shows that 1/4 of farmers are not interested in agrivoltaics. Any insights on whether those folks can change their mind or not? I think, Tom, based on what you said about needing to get people actually out into the field to kind of like, make that connection, it seems like it's possible. But any thoughts from the group?
I would just say that seeing is believing. I think a lot of people are opposed to solar because they have this idea of what solar is, and we hear that there are bad examples of solar projects that have been incredibly destructive to the soil underneath, causing drainage issues for neighbors. There are legitimate problems to be addressed there, but I think it can also be done right in a way that does protect soil health, biodiversity, allow for agriculture within. So I think, again, elevating those examples of projects that have been done well, that show that this can work as a model for farmers, help them diversify revenue, become more resilient to drought, extreme heat. There's still some work to be done to elevate those good examples, and really getting folks out in the field to see it for themselves. It does make a huge difference. I've seen that happen. I remember a few years ago at Jack Solar Garden, we had I was there working when I was at the National Renewable Energy Lab as a grad intern, and we had a group of landowners from Texas who came in, and definitely not folks you would typically be supportive of solar that you'd expect, but they took a look. They looked at the pasture and forage growing underneath, and run my cattle under here. Right. To change a few things here and there, but could work. Seeing it does make a huge difference in people's perception of it overall.
Absolutely. I think we're gonna get ready to wrap up, but Austin, anything you want to share about, AFT's ongoing smart solar work or ongoing work in Colorado?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are actually saw a few of the folks on the line. We are going to be doing some technical assistance, working on some technical assistance with farmers right now. Got one really exciting project up near Steamboat that we're working on and doing some design work and that initial feasibility. I want to thank the Walton Family Foundation for funding that work, for ongoing technical assistance in the state. We're also working with AgriSolar on some of those informational materials we talked about, get that same funding. So appreciate the support from them. And yeah, if anyone has follow-up questions, feel free to reach out. On the chat.
Wonderful. Well, Tom, Kristen, thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks to all the attendees. This has been recorded, and so we'll be sending out a recording of this, and we really look forward to staying in touch with all of you and continuing to drive agrivoltaics forward in Colorado. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you all.